I have always placed great importance on the sanctity of marriage, perhaps even to an excessive degree. Despite numerous advances from other women, I never entertained the idea of leaving my wife, as she was the only woman for me, and I had no reason or inclination to look elsewhere. I first met my now wife at a mutual friend's wedding in the early 1990s, and I was immediately smitten with her. We dated for 6 months before deciding to tie the knot in a simple ceremony that left us both overjoyed. Although it was my first marriage, my wife had previously been married and divorced a year prior to our meeting. I didn't want to pry into the details of her past relationship, as I felt it was unnecessary to dredge up any painful memories, and my wife herself was not forthcoming with much information. I consider myself incredibly fortunate to be married to my wife, who is not only intelligent and stunningly beautiful, but also an exceptional hostess. When we got married, the country was in turmoil, and secure employment was hard to come by. My wife, who was a medical professional, found work at a military unit, while I worked multiple jobs in addition to my primary occupation, striving to ensure that my family lacked for nothing. From the moment I met her, I held my wife in the highest regard and adored her deeply, cherishing her as the most precious person in my life. After 2 years of marriage, my wife and I were still unable to conceive, which caused her great distress and anxiety. She even expressed fears that I would leave her due to her infertility. We later learned that she had a fallopian tube obstruction, which came as a devastating blow to her. However, I remained steadfast by her side, offering unwavering support, comfort, and assurance that I loved her more than anything, and that I was determined to help her become a mother through whatever means necessary, as modern medicine had advanced so much. Despite my heavy workload and financial constraints, I persisted in my pursuit of our goal, taking her to various doctors and clinics, trying out different remedies and undergoing several operations. Each time, I held onto the hope that this would be the breakthrough we needed, but unfortunately, our efforts proved futile and we were unable to conceive. Despite almost 5 years of unsuccessful attempts to conceive, I refused to give up hope and remained optimistic, believing that a miracle was still possible. My unwavering determination provided my wife with strength, and she often told me that she found solace in my optimism, allowing her to look confidently towards the future. I was convinced that she was the person I was meant to spend my life with, and I was willing to do whatever it took to make her happy. She was my unwavering source of support and a strong foundation, and with her by my side, I felt like I could conquer anything. One day, we stumbled upon an article about the Human Reproduction Institute, which offered the possibility of artificial insemination, giving us newfound hope and renewed energy to continue striving towards our goal of starting a family. I was determined to do whatever it takes to make our dream of starting a family come true. The surgery and the necessary rehabilitation period were expensive, and I had to find a way to earn the necessary funds. Living in a small town, my options were limited, but I stumbled upon an ad in a magazine calling for reserve soldiers to serve under contract for decent wages. The job entailed specific types of work in particular places, and the pay was good. Although I wasn't particularly patriotic and had no interest in serving anyone's political agenda, I needed the money to achieve my goal of starting a family with my wife. After giving it some thought, I decided to take the risk and join the Marines, even if it meant putting my health on the line. My wife was hesitant and tearful as I prepared to leave for work, afraid that something might happen to me while I was gone. I reminded her that we needed the money for a good cause, as we weren't born into wealthy families and needed to work hard for everything we had. Eventually, I convinced her that everything would be okay and left for distant places to earn the necessary sum for the surgery and rehabilitation period. Upon returning home, we went to the institute and underwent the operation, and a miracle happened. My wife became pregnant. We were overjoyed and welcomed our daughter into the world with open arms. I helped out around the house, took care of our baby, and worked hard to provide for my family. My wife often referred to me as a perpetual motion, as I was constantly moving, eager to give my family everything they deserved. Eventually, I secured a stable job and began earning good money. We were able to upgrade our lifestyle, moving to a larger apartment and going on trips to the sea and nature. We spent our free time together, enjoying activities like skiing and skating, and I made sure to spoil my wife with new clothes and even a new car. Looking back on those days, I couldn't help but feel like we truly deserved all the happiness that had come our way. After 14 years of what I thought was a happy marriage, my daughter was slowly growing up, and my family always came first. I never felt like my life was dull or ordinary, and we never had any family quarrels. I respected my wife and always tried to avoid giving her any reason to be unhappy. Even when she was dissatisfied with something small, I would try to reach a compromise with her. I always tried to treat her like a woman and show her how much I loved and valued her. Even when we were struggling financially, I found ways to surprise her with flowers, gifts, and other little things that made her happy. Our sex life was also satisfying, and I made sure to be attentive to my wife's needs and interests. I considered myself open-minded, and we trusted each other completely. From my perspective, everything was harmonious, and my wife always said that she was satisfied with our intimate relationship, and that I fulfilled all her needs. I have never felt jealous of my wife, despite the fact that she worked in a male-dominated military unit as a medic. My job required me to go on occasional business trips, which usually lasted for 1.5 to 2 weeks, but I always looked forward to coming back home to my loving wife, who greeted me with warmth and joy. One day, while on a business trip, I found out that my work was canceled and decided to surprise my wife by returning home early. I bought a bouquet of roses and champagne and headed straight home, assuming that my wife and daughter were still at work and school, respectively. However, when I tried to open the door with my key, I discovered that it was locked from the inside. I rang the doorbell and knocked on the door, but there was no response. I began to worry and even considered calling the police. Finally, my wife's voice came from behind the door, asking who was there. Relieved, I responded that it was me and explained that my business trip was canceled. At the time, I thought she might have been sleeping or perhaps feeling ill. As she opened the door for me, I didn't recognize her at all. Her eyes seemed unfamiliar and distant, as if I wasn't even there. I walked through the doorway and into the hallway, where I saw a military officer sitting in an armchair. It wasn't until then that I noticed my wife was wearing a robe over her naked body. Suddenly, everything became clear. In a calm tone, she pointed out that I was bleeding, and I realized that I had been squeezing the bouquet of roses so hard that the flowers were crushed through my fingers. At that moment, my legs trembled for the first time in my life, and I collapsed to the floor by the door. I struggled to find the words to describe what I was feeling. It was like a dream, as if this couldn't be happening to me. I couldn't believe my eyes because it seemed impossible that my wife could be capable of this. She spoke to me calmly, warning me not to cause a scene or blame the other man. But I was too overwhelmed to even consider such a reaction. If I had given in to my anger, I might have done something irreversible. Looking back, I'm grateful that I didn't. As I sat in the apartment with my wife, I remained unaware of his departure. Suddenly, she knelt down in front of me and tearfully uttered, "It happens in life." I struggled to comprehend the situation, but she continued speaking. Amidst sobs, she confessed, "I can't live like this anymore. I'm confused. I want to repent to you. You're good. I'm bad. I don't deserve you." As her words spilled out, I couldn't help but feel a sense of betrayal. She divulged that she had cheated on me multiple times throughout our relationship. It all began when we first started dating, and she intentionally met up with her ex-husband to prove to him what he had lost. From there, she had affairs with military doctors, including one during a refresher course in another city, who wooed her with poetry, and another who she met at work in our town. Her last affair had been ongoing for almost a month, and they had even met at our house. She expressed remorse for the damage she had caused and acknowledged that she had desecrated our home. Though I couldn't comprehend the full extent of her actions, I was grateful for her honesty. However, it would take time to process the depth of her betrayal and whether I could forgive her. As she spoke, I asked, "Why are you doing this to me?" Her response was tearful, explaining that she couldn't give a reason for her actions, that it was an inexplicable passion without excuse, and it was up to me to decide. Despite this, she promised unwavering faithfulness if I found it in my heart to forgive her. The first few days were a blur as I struggled to eat, sleep, and function at work. Nights were filled with cold sweats and endless smoking, with no respite from my torment. My colleagues noticed my change in demeanor and questioned my well-being. Meanwhile, my wife's constant crying and pleading for forgiveness only added to my confusion and despair. I longed to share my feelings with her, to express my love, but found myself at a loss for words, suffocating under a constant lump in my throat. Over the course of 6 months, I spent a great deal of time reflecting on our life together. I delved deep within myself, searching for answers and trying to determine whether I was the one at fault. This internal struggle left me burdened with guilt, which caused me to emotionally and physically distance myself from my wife. I became apprehensive about engaging in sexual intimacy with her, fearing that I wouldn't be able to satisfy her. Our communication was limited to mundane everyday topics, and I focused my attention on our daughter, hoping to shield her from any negative impact caused by our situation. Eventually, my emotions subsided and my pain lessened. One day, I summoned the courage to speak with my wife about our situation. I expressed that I harbored no resentment towards her and that I loved her just as much as before. However, I acknowledged that what had occurred had changed me in some way, and I needed time to understand how. I asked my wife to promise me that if she ever felt that our life together was not what she wanted, she would tell me immediately. I didn't want to waste time on something that wasn't meant to be, and I believed that we could still find happiness, even if it was with someone else. We reconnected with each other, but things weren't the same. I tried to maintain our previous dynamic, but I began experiencing inexplicable problems with my potency in bed with my wife, which only intensified my inner turmoil. Despite this, I prioritized my family for the next 6 years, and eventually stopped wondering if she was unfaithful. She remained as beautiful, intelligent, and nurturing as ever. Though I forgave her, something inside me broke, leaving me feeling empty and poisoned to my core. My once unshakable fortitude crumbled, and the sense of novelty was absent. With time, I became a different person, transformed by the true meaning of betrayal. I often reminisced about the days when I traveled to far-off lands to provide for my daughter, recalling the phrase on my backpack that read, "What doesn't kill us makes us stronger," with a smile. After some time, I experienced a sudden release from the heavy burden that had been weighing me down for a long time. It was a perplexing feeling, and I struggled to comprehend what had prevented me from making changes in my life earlier. I had always been optimistic and believed that things would eventually work out. But even though they did, something vital was missing from my soul. It was the very thing that gave our marriage meaning and motivation to move forward. However, my sense of duty prevented me from leaving, as I felt it would be a betrayal. But then something changed, and suddenly, I no longer felt like a traitor. One morning, as if awakening from a long slumber, I realized that my inner transformation had come to an end, and I had not been living my life, but someone else's. Looking at my sleeping wife, I realized that I no longer knew her. That morning, I left my home and disconnected my phone, taking to the streets and eventually finding myself standing on the side of the road amidst the woods. It's difficult to articulate, but I felt liberated, like a bird set free from its cage. I had a sense that I had atoned for my past mistakes, and my thoughts and reflections only reinforced my newfound sense of freedom. Later that evening, I returned home and shared everything with my wife. We had a lengthy discussion, but there was no blame or accusations made. She wept, confessing that she had been waiting for this day to come. Strangely enough, I no longer felt any sympathy for her. I explained my current understanding of life to her, and she shared hers with me. Although she begged for forgiveness repeatedly, I had already pardoned her long ago. However, I acknowledged that I was no longer the same man she had married. We had spent nearly 23 years together, with 15 of those years devoted solely to her and our daughter. The following 8 years were a blur to me. Throughout this entire period, I refrained from reproaching my wife for anything and internalized my experiences. However, a lot has changed during this time, particularly my understanding and attitude towards everything. I have come to realize that continuing my marriage with her would have been a futile waste of time. As my daughter grew up and prepared to leave the family nest, my wife came to terms with the situation. I believe she recognized that our paths had diverged long ago, and we were only walking side by side out of habit. To be fair, there were good aspects to our life together. But when I was in the dark, nothing else mattered, and I was content. After finalizing the divorce, I explained everything to my daughter, who is now old enough to comprehend the situation. We continue to see her regularly, far more often than I see my ex-wife. Life moves on, and the emptiness that once consumed me no longer echoes within my soul. I am hesitant to pursue a long-term relationship with any woman, and I have no desire to do so. I now know with certainty that what does not kill us outright may leave us disabled.